we use to detox patients on an outpatient basis. And that patent was officially approved January 1st of 2019. We're currently in the middle of working on a licensing agreement with a couple of organizations that will probably pick up our program and use it for their services too. I'm a recovering addict and alcoholic and Methodist, and you know, a lot of us Methodists ended up where I am at right now. So at any rate, just to give you a little idea of who we see, we treat people anywhere from the age of 18. I think our oldest patient was 82. And for a long time, back particularly since 2010, we have seen a lot of folks addicted to pain medications. And as that became worse and more prevalent, we've seen other drugs used to replace the pain meds that they were using, and actually in all ages. We have several folks in their late 50s, early 60s that have actually resorted to heroin or other opiates that were out on the street when they couldn't get their pain meds, and it's become a huge problem. Of course, the government finally figured out that a lot of these deaths that are going on are as a result of some of that overprescribing that happened quite a while ago. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, generally speaking, anymore, it's talked about a lot more than it used to be. And chances are, if they're looking around for other pain meds, there's probably a good chance that they have run into somebody that has resorted to the heroin as a replacement drug. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, now with what's going on with the awareness of the opiate crisis, there have been other drugs that are currently used to replace opiates to stabilize patients. There's Suboxone and Methadone are the two most common drugs used to stabilize patients. The problem with both of those drugs is that they are replacement drugs for the opiates, but unfortunately, both of those drugs are actually much harder to get off of than regular opiates are, much harder. They have long half-life, and so their detox is much longer. We really don't recommend using either of those medications for any more than 6 months. And even at that time, you're probably going to have to be detoxed off of them. You know, they claim that they can wean patients down, and we actually were a Suboxone provider at one time, and we found out that trying to wean patients off of Suboxone, it didn't make any difference how we did it or how low we got them weaned down to. When they finally quit taking that medication, they always had some withdrawal. And actually, back at that time that we were doing that, we had started to prescribe some of the 8 medications that we use for detox today to individuals for their withdrawal symptoms back at that time. Most of our patients at that time didn't need more than 2 or 3 of those drugs to finish out their detox, but they still needed help to get through the final detox. And what changed our mind about the Suboxone was the doctor that I was working with at the time. He was in on a Saturday morning, and a lady that was a nurse that he had worked with in the past, she brought her son in, and he had been addicted. He'd been shooting up a mixture of cocaine and heroin, speedballs they're called. And when she brought him in, he was just a mess. I mean, he was in as much withdrawal as anybody I've ever seen. And I have worked in the treatment business for the past 29 years, primarily in detoxes. So I've seen a lot of detoxing. And at any rate, we took a look at him, and at that time we had used 8 different drugs at one point or another for people who were trying to get off of Suboxone. And he was so bad that the doctor said, I think I'm going to give him all 8 of these medications. The worst it can do is kill him, because he's going to kill himself if he doesn't quit. And so that's what we did, and we just simply told his mother, wrote him all 8 medications, and told his mother to have him take all 8 medications, and should make him sleep. And when he wakes up, we just simply wanted him to drink as much fluid as he could, and then take another round of the medicine and go right back to sleep. Well, that was on a Saturday morning. She called the office on Tuesday morning, and she said, I don't know what those medications were supposed to do, but she said, he's perfectly fine this morning. It's just like he's back. And and to my knowledge, he is still clean and sober today. When that happened, that was when we decided that we wanted to get away from the Suboxone and actually use these 8 medications. And so that's what we started doing in 2010. 2015, we were using it exclusively. We weren't using Suboxone at all, and decided that since it worked as well as it did, what we found that was that it worked for every drug that we ever tried it on, that anybody was trying to get off of. Particularly works particularly well for alcoholics if they don't have a history of the DTs actually going into the seizures and all that sort of thing. And so we actually detox a lot of alcoholics. Usually a detox for an alcoholic will last anywhere from 24 to 36 hours. Coming off of opiates, it normally is about a 3-day to 4-day process. If we're detoxing somebody off of Suboxone or methadone, in spite of the fact that we wean them down as far as we can, their detox is going to be probably 5 to 6 days of sleeping off and on, and we've detoxed about, give or take a little, about 950 people using this procedure. Of the 950 people, we've only had 2 patients end up in the hospital, and both of those ended up in the hospital because of dehydration. So it's really important. Anytime that you're doing a detox, it's extremely important that they drink as much fluid as they can. So I'm just going to kind of open up to questions and that you might have about anything connected with alcoholism, drug addiction, detox, or whatever. Yes. Right, and that's a big part of the problem today, is unfortunately, so many doctors really do not understand the addiction process. The key to diagnosing addiction, one of the first questions that I ask a new patient is, tell me a little bit about your family history. Tell me who in your family, background, whatever, has had a problem with alcohol or drugs in the past, or maybe currently might have a problem. Unfortunately, a lot of particularly when I got sober back in '88, a lot of families at that time weren't talking about Uncle Joe that was alcoholic and nobody had anything to do with him and whatever. And so he wasn't even, in some cases, considered to be an alcoholic. In my particular situation, I had an Uncle Art that was, the whole family knew that Art was alcoholic because he literally drank himself to death. And so in our family, if you didn't drink like Uncle Art, you really didn't have a problem, okay? And I didn't reach that point, but I got real close to that point with my drinking and using. And so consequently, when I told my parents that I believed I was alcoholic, the first thing that my mother said is, well, you're not like Uncle Art. I said, no, I'm not dead yet, and that really was the truth, and that's the problem. So many of the kids today have the genetic predisposition to addiction, but it doesn't really get kicked off until, unfortunately, they're prescribed too much medication or they're hanging out with kids that are starting to use other things and whatever, and boom, off they go to the races. We see a lot of younger patients whose parents, neither parent, had any kind of substance abuse problem, but when we get to start to question the parents as to family history, then that's when we can get to the bottom of it, because most of our younger patients don't have a clue as to who in their family had a real problem. Yes? Right. I actually have two other people in our organization who are recovering, a nurse, and then I have another counselor. I'm a counselor, and we both work with the doctor in making sure that they're not prescribed the wrong medications. We do individual counseling, and we do support groups in our office. I actually have sort of a group of counselors outside of our office that we can access for special needs beyond the addiction. We primarily deal with the addiction, but we also identify other problems that a patient might have, maybe abuse of all types, whatever. Sometimes they're addicted to other things, I'm talking about gambling, sex, all those sorts of things. And so we do have a group of counselors that I can access to refer. Well, you have to understand, we strongly suggest it, okay? Our program is a private, confidential program. We do not deal with the courts, okay? Unless a person is referred to us specifically by an attorney. Ironically, we've got 4 or 5 attorneys around town that we've actually detoxed and treated, and we do get referrals from those attorneys. But we want people who actually are at a point in their life where they want to, they just need to have a glimmer of wanting to quit. Nobody walks into our office all happy and that they're there, because they know that they've got a problem. The nice part about my job is if we do a good job, we can see a complete turnaround in a person's attitude, behaviors, and everything in probably less than 2 weeks' time, because they've gotten all that stuff off of their back, and naturally they've got most of us have a lot of consequences to face once we get sober. And part of the reason I've been sober for 30 years is I really don't want to have to go through that first year of recovery, because it was horrible. All the consequences that I had developed over the course of my using time. And I started using regularly at age 18, and I was 41 when I got sober, so that makes me 50 years old, right? No, I'm 71. Yes, you have a question? There are babies that are addicted that are seen in the hospital, because they're born addicted.
Now, is there anything you can help them, like you say you help them otherwise? Is there brand new babies?
No, there isn't anything. Normally, if they're born addicted, that is probably going to be addressed at the hospital at the time of birth. They have probably a predisposition to addiction because the mother obviously used. Whether they become addicts or alcoholics is always a matter of choice. And naturally we see, in a lot of families, we will see, maybe one child of the family that's addicted, and the other children in the family have no problems, and yet they had a parent that had an addiction problem. So.
I work in intensive care nursing, and I can tell you, those babies that are born to parents who are addicted, they are the most miserable, unhappy, awful babies in the entire world. All they do is sleep 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
They are miserable.
Yeah. You have to remember that most of the things that the babies are coming off of, the most common thing is some type of opiate, either methadone or Suboxone or whatever. And it's an extremely, extremely painful withdrawal. I ended up becoming addicted to morphine when I was in the service, and I went through a cold turkey withdrawal. And what happens in withdrawal is if you don't have medicine, and in my case, I was in a motel is where I was at, you lose so much body fluid that you end up, if you've ever seen the end of a marathon race where these, somebody's out in the infield all crumpled up and whatever, it's extreme cramping. And I mean, literally your whole body cramps. And it's very, very painful. And, and in spite of that, that's the reason that so many people who are using today are scared to death of the withdrawal, because almost everybody has tried to get off, and they experience some of those withdrawal symptoms. So the symptoms of withdrawal are, first of all, you're going to be anxious, you're going to sweat and chill, you're going to have involuntary muscle contractions, jerking, you're going to have restless legs, you're going to have stomach pain and cramping, you're going to have some nausea, you're going to have diarrhea, and then you're not, because of all those things, you're not going to be able to sleep. And so what we do, the 7 or the 8 medications that we use treat each one of those particular symptoms, but we actually don't use the sleeping medication until after the detox. We actually use the sleeping medication to help people get back to a normal pattern of sleep, because the other 7 medications used in combination will make them sleep. And a lot of times, a lot of our patients will come in saying, well, I just haven't been able to sleep at all. And we had a young man a week ago, he was coming off of methamphetamines, and he hadn't slept in, I don't know, probably 2 or 3 days anyhow. And with the first dose, he slept 17 straight hours, and then woke up, was awake just long enough to use the bathroom, get something to drink. His mother fed him a little bit of toast or whatever. He went right back to sleep, and he slept another 12 hours. You know, so that when you're at that point, you're so exhausted that you don't even realize how tired you are. And because when you're addicted, you get to a point in your life where you just simply aren't able to get good sleep. With my drinking, at the end of my drinking, I had a bottle of NyQuil sitting on the nightstand all the time because nobody would say anything to me about a bottle of NyQuil. What they didn't understand was I was drinking 2 to 3 bottles a night at the end, because back at that time, it was good NyQuil. It had good alcohol in it, you know, not the stuff that they use today. You'd have to drink 6 or 7 bottles probably now to get the equivalent. But that's just kind of where you get with almost any type of addiction. And speaking of meth, what's going on right now, and I kind of have to preface this by saying that Mexican cartels are probably the best marketers in the world. Those guys know exactly when to come to market with what they need to use to replace what everybody's having problems with. What happened was when the opiate whole thing took off, and particularly when we were hearing about a lot of heroin overdoses, the Mexican cartels, they really didn't grow the poppy plant to harvest it for the opium. They were having to import it from Afghanistan, Middle East, and whatever. And so when the whole heroin issue became huge, what they did was they started to make fentanyl. And fentanyl, the fentanyl that they make is kind of a bathtub fentanyl, you could call it. And so what they started to do was, as the heroin become harder and harder to get, more expensive, they just simply replaced it with fentanyl at a cheaper price, because every addict is always looking for a bargain, you know. And the problem is that the fentanyl is a little bit harder to get off of. Pharmaceutical grade fentanyl is very difficult to get off of. The fentanyl patches and whatever, they're very hard to get off of, and because the fentanyl is so much stronger. So, but those are some of the things, and the methamphetamines today that we see. I can tell almost immediately when somebody that comes in that has a meth problem what they've been using, because you probably have heard or seen about the meth labs that were kind of all over this part of the state for quite a while. You don't hear hardly anything about meth labs anymore, because the state finally got smart and really set down on the prescription and use of Sudafed, which was a primary ingredient in that drug, along with, you know, battery acid and other things, you know. And so those folks, when they came in, when they come in, basically their teeth are mostly gone. This kid that we just detoxed here a couple weeks ago, he came in, he said he was on meth, and I said, how long have you been using? He said, 2 years. I said, you must be using the Mexican meth. And he said, how do you know? I said, you got teeth, you know, because the Mexican meth is actually a crystal-like substance. It looks like crystals, and it's manufactured in Mexico, but it doesn't have, it's intense. A lot of the problems that the police are having right now with people that are completely out of control, that meth is much more intense, and so if you are on it for quite a while and you go without sleep for several days, and then you're confronted and they try to confine you, that's when they get really, really violent. And so those folks, ironically, they're really pretty easy to detox. It's keeping them with us. That's the tough part, keeping them coming back. Always, always with our patients, the hardest thing that I have to do is to get patients in some type of support group. We have support groups in our office. We refer patients out to outside support groups, AA and NA and all that sort of thing. Basically, it's very difficult to get folks to continue and follow up with that. Yeah. They are fighting the cravings. We use, once they're detoxed, we use several different medications for the cravings. We use a medication called naltrexone, which it comes in two forms. There's a pill form that they take every day, and then there's also an injectable form that lasts 30 days. The injectable form is expensive. It's about $1,250 a shot, but insurance will normally pay for that medication for up to a year. The pill form costs about $1.10 a day is all it costs, but you have to take it. And what that medication will do is if you try to use opiates and you have the naltrexone in you, you will get no effect whatsoever from the drug. So it's just like you wasted your money taking the drug. The problem is that to do that for very long, if you're still in the old environment and hanging around the old people, the chances of you lasting very long are pretty slim. And so that's where it's the combination of things, all of the support groups, the other counseling, if need be, outside counseling. We use other medications in addition to the naltrexone. We will use Wellbutrin quite often. That kind of helps with the nerves initially. For other drugs, there's a medication called N-acetylcysteine that we use for people who are having a tough time getting off of marijuana. And ironically, the majority, and I'm saying the vast majority, probably 80 to 90% of our patients who are addicted to opiates and have tried heroin and everything else, they will tell you that the hardest drug that they had to get off of was marijuana, because that's the drug that will take them back to using, and it's such a subtle addiction. It isn't something that normally you have huge withdrawal from, other than the fact that that withdrawal involves a loss of sleep, and you kind of become real edgy and grouchy and whatever, and you've used it for long enough, almost like a drink after dinner, whatever, alcoholic drink after dinner. And so a lot of our patients have a real tough time getting away from that. That's the reason that when a new patient comes in, I explain to them that when we're drug testing them, which they're usually drug tested almost every time that they come in, we're not particularly looking for the drug that they came in having problems with, opiates or whatever. We're actually looking for the drug that they're trying to switch to, a replacement drug, because that's the most common thing that happens, is they just simply will switch from one drug to another. So. Unfortunately, and this is a terrible thing to have to tell families, is that one of the best ways to get somebody off of drugs is make sure that in one way or another they come to the attention of law enforcement, because they will eventually get forced, if they are arrested, they will eventually get forced into some type of program that the court has. And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But you know, if you're a family that's not wanting to lose a child, I think you need to do whatever you need to do to get that child help one way or another. Naturally, nobody wants to turn their kid in to the police, but it may save their lives. And no parent ever wants to hear that advice, ever, you know, until they've kind of come to the end of their rope. You know, and usually the ones that come to the end of their rope, they've lost a lot of money, spent a lot of money, have a lot of money stolen, all that sort of thing. And so, you know, my oldest boy is addicted to marijuana. He went for 14 years without using. And he's back using again, and to the point that he actually grows marijuana for a living. And so while I certainly don't approve of his lifestyle, it's a choice that he makes, and he's 49 years old, and there's not much I can do about it at that time. So, I'm sorry, Denver. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Well, statistically, if you have one parent that's an addict or an alcoholic, statistically, your chances of having problems are about 50-50, about 50%. If you have both parents that have a problem, that number goes up to between 80 and 90%. And unfortunately, you know, family interventions are usually not pleasant. And you know, if you have a kid that's still using, and they have children, you know, the examples that the child is seeing, even the small children, I'm talking about 4, 5, 6 years old, they are aware to some degree of what's going on. And so I don't think that you can start too early with talking with a child about this type of a problem. It might upset the parent. You know, unfortunately, in this town, there used to be, I don't know that it's active anymore, but there used to be an Alateen program, which was specifically for children of alcoholics. I don't know if there is still an Alateen program. I haven't heard about it for some time, but that was something that we would refer children to if a parent came in with that kind of situation. But it's a real tough thing to deal with. So.
Wow, I learned a lot. Thank you so much.
You bet. Thanks for asking me.